here are all the parts I'm going to be installing today. These are the OME DAKAR leaf springs. As you can see, they're quite a bit more heavy duty than the stock springs. I've also went ahead and got a set of the bushings. In the kit I purchased, it came with the exhaust extension bracket, which I know a lot of guys just modify the exhaust and don't bother putting on this bracket. I'll probably take a look at it and then decide if I'm going to use it or not. And of course I got the extended Ubolts, so we're working with a lot of new hardware, which will be nice. But yeah, this is basically it. Do a quick measurement for before and after. We've got 36 3/4 on the passenger side. 36 3/4 on the driver's side. Obviously you can do this without removing the spare tire, but it does give you quite a bit of extra room to work. This kind of gives you a better idea. The OEM leaf springs are pretty weak from the factory, and after a couple of years of the camper shell and the rooftop tent, and as you can see, they're pretty worn out. They're basically straight. There's no arch to them at all. It's definitely something I should have done a while ago. Yeah, so this will be a much needed upgrade. One thing I have done is in the last month I've soaked all the hardware with PB Blaster. Being that this is a Northwest truck, I don't anticipate having any problems, but I did have one bolt that was seized on the front suspension. So I just went ahead and coated all the hardware a couple times, and hopefully I won't have any issues. So this next thing we'll need to do is get this on jack stands, remove the wheels, and get the rear shocks off. All right, one of the first things we want to do is unbolt this rear brake line bracket from the axle. As you can see, the axle is lowered quite a bit now that I have the wheel off and it's in the air. And the OEM brake line that you see right here is already stretched quite a bit. Once we get the leaf pack installed, you'll want to buy an extended rear brake line to avoid having any problems. But at the moment I don't have the extended rear brake line, so I'll just have to do that upgrade at another time. But just to avoid damaging this line as it sits now, you're going to want to unbolt it before we remove the OEM leaf pack. And this should just be a 12mm. Next you're going to want to remove the rear shock, and it's just a 17mm up top and a 17mm on the bottom. Okay, the next step is to loosen and remove the U-bolts. And as you can see, there are 4 bolts, 2 U-bolts, 4 bolts underneath. And so we want to loosen and remove these. And these are going to be 21mm. Now that we have the U-bolts off, the next thing we're going to need to do is lower the axle so we can remove the bolts that hold the leaf pack to the frame. As you can see, I went ahead and put a jack stand underneath the axle just as a precaution while I remove the leaf spring. And we're going to start by removing the lower rear shackle hardware, and that's also a 19mm. Well, I definitely spoke too soon. The front leaf spring bolt is seized, and just like it happens with a lot of these, it's seized inside the bushing, that metal collar that's in there. It's seized inside there. I can actually get the bolt to turn, but you can tell that the inside of the bushing is what's catching it, so I think I'm just going to have to try cutting it out. Alright, so I finally got the bolt out. I thought I could get it out with the reciprocating saw, but that didn't work, so I had to bust out the grinder. In any case, it's out. Now the leaf spring is loose there. Next thing you'll need to do is remove the nut on the top of the shackle there, and remove this 14mm down here, and carefully pull the stock leaf spring out. Alright, I got the stock leaf spring out. I thought it would be easier by unbolting this, but I believe it would have come out just as easily, just leaving it all together as one pack. I'll do the other side without unbolting it and see if it made a difference, but as you can see, the metal sleeve is what gets corroded and gets stuck inside that bushing, so it came off, and I ended up having to use a grinder. The Sawzall just wasn't up to it, but the grinder cut it out pretty easily. But there we go. The stock leaf spring has been pulled out. I'm going to paint the hanger before I put it up there, because I kind of scuffed it up a little bit with the blade, cutting off the bolt. Once I get that painted, I'm going to go ahead and get the new hardware in and install the driver's side DAKAR. One thing you want to keep in mind, there is a left and a right to the leaf packs. The one that ends in A is for the driver's side, and the one that ends in B is for the passenger side. So you want to make sure you keep that in mind when you install them. And of course, the plus symbol faces the front of the vehicle. And I went ahead and put some primer and some paint on the hanger, just as an extra layer of protection, since I did scuff it up a little bit while grinding off that bolt. Alright, the next thing we'll need to do before we install the leaf spring is get the new bushings in. So I'll need to remove the shackle. In the future, I'm planning on upgrading these to the greasable shackles, but for now I'm just going to use the stock ones, and I'll just replace those at another time. But it's definitely a recommended upgrade when you do this, to get the greasable shackles. So I'm going to pull this off and get the new bushings installed. Alright, I've got the top one installed, and I've got the one of the leaf springs. Now it's time to install the leaf spring. From what I've read, mounting the front of the leaf spring first is what's recommended. Alright, so now the driver leaf spring is installed. It was actually kind of a pain to get on with just one person. The hardest part was getting this center pin lined up with the axle. I tried a couple of different methods, but what ended up working was I used a strap on the axle that I ran up to the front of the frame to just keep a little bit of tension on it, and I got the bolt on the front of the leaf spring. I ended up just attaching the entire leaf to the body and letting it hang, and what ended up helping was just to loosen the U-bolts on the passenger side just enough to allow the axle to twist a little bit. So now that I have that lined up, I'm going to loosely attach the hardware for the U-bolts and start tearing down the other side. The U-bolts and the mount are installed. I don't have it torqued down yet. It's just kind of snug until I get the other side done. I want to wait till I get this on the ground to torque everything down to spec. And I also have the hardware in the rear bolted on. I'm going to go ahead and throw on the rear shock and get started on the other side. Something else I had to do. I know in the beginning I mentioned that was the only bolt you had to take off to give the brake line a little bit of slack, but actually I had to unbolt the brackets for the hard lines there and under there, and that just gave it even more slack to allow me to lower the axle without anything binding. So I'm sure that I'm going to have to do the same thing on this side, and this side it appears that there are 3 separate bolts, so I'll undo those after I install the shock. Well, as you probably noticed in some of the other clips, I did forget to install the bump stop back onto this. You can use the stock bump stop, but you will need to drill out the bottom of the bump stop itself and just make a little bit more room for the DAKAR leaf pack. I'm not sure if you'll have to do that for other brands of leaf packs, but for the DAKAR you will have to drill it out just a little bit more, and then it'll fit on there. All right, and I'm all done. The passenger side went a lot smoother. I ended up using the exhaust extension bracket for now, but yeah, the passenger side went a lot smoother. Yeah, so that's what it looks like. Everything's back together. I set it down, just kind of tightened everything a little bit, and I'm gonna drive it around the block. Then I'm gonna torque everything down to spec. Alright, so just finishing the install, and I haven't driven it at all, so I'm sure it's gonna settle. I hope it's gonna settle. We're at about 39 3/4. Alright, I've got everything back together. I've driven a few miles and retorqued everything, and so far everything looks pretty good. There definitely seems to be a slight rake as it sits right now, but maybe after a while things will settle a bit. Alright, even though I've only driven a couple miles, measurement I'm showing now is about 39.5. So 39.5. I do have the spare tire. I do have the spare tire back on, and it's got about a 1/4 tank of gas. So once I get the canopy back on, I would imagine it would settle a little bit more. But as it sits now, I'm pretty happy with it. It's nice to get rid of the lean that it used to have when I had the lift in the front with the OEM springs in the rear. And with the canopy in the back, it just exaggerated the lean even more. So it looks great now that it's leveled out a little bit. And if anyone's wondering, the front currently sits at 38, just about 38.5. In about a week or two, when I retorque everything and get the canopy back on, I'll take a final measurement and see where everything sits, and I'll probably just put those in the comments. So I'll make sure to leave the torque specs that I used. I'll leave those in the video description, and also make sure to include a list of everything that I installed in the video. But yeah, overall I'm pretty happy with it. It's definitely a lot stiffer than stock. Keep in mind that my stock suspension was pretty worn out. It's not a harsh ride by any means, but you can just tell that everything is a lot tighter now. So I'm really interested to see how different it'll feel once the canopy is back on and there's a little extra weight back there. But so far I'm really impressed with how it feels. It definitely handles a lot better at freeway speeds and just around town. But yeah, overall I'm definitely really really happy with it.